Why do brand new vehicles you buy break down a lot more than old school vehicles, even when I take care of them?
New vehicles break down more often than old school cars because of extreme technological complexity, the use of fragile electronics, and the push for maximum efficiency, which often leads to smaller components running under higher stress. While old cars were simple and mechanical, modern cars rely on hundreds of sensors and computer modules, where one minor glitch can cause a total failure. New vehicles break down more often than old school cars because of extreme technological complexity, the use of fragile electronics. Brand new vehicles often experience more breakdowns, typically electrical software glitches, than older cars due to extreme complexity, featuring thousands more parts, dozens of sensors, and complex computer modules that can fail. While older cars had mechanical failures, modern vehicles suffer from electronics, battery issues, and sensitive turbochargers designed for efficiency over longevity. Reddit plus 3.
What? Yeah, so newer vehicles might not last as long as older vehicles because they might have electrical issues, but what can you do to fix that? You can't do a lot, but you can do a bit. You can take it back and maybe request if it has a recall, I would request taking it and doing that recall, not just fixing it, but maybe trying to fix the solution before it gets to be a big problem. Fix fix the solution before the issue gets to be a huge problem. Because sometimes with these vehicles might not last the way they were supposed to, but they might last better if you take care of them. They might last. But my dad had a brand new truck. It's the transfer case that broke, I think is what he said. And yeah, so talking about this, and it's ridiculous to have a brand new vehicle you drive right off the lot to break like this, and it shouldn't break. But I think the dealerships and manufacturers don't care as much as they used to. That's gone out the window. This is how much they care now. Zero. And they used to care more than they do today. Now they just care about getting all the money they can get in and hardly care about half the vehicle's quality or half the vehicle or whatever. They don't care about a vehicle anymore. They care about all the money rolling in. They don't care so much on all this equipment. They just care about adding extra things to your vehicle, not caring if it actually makes it, whether this vehicle makes it back or not. They say it makes the stuff they add, they say it makes it safer. Yeah, it might make it safer to a point, but I think it's making it safer to their back, but it's not making it safer for our backs too much. Like having all those cameras in the vehicle may be needed, but we also need a lot more people that really know what they're doing with these vehicles, not just driving them careless and not just doing whatever they want. But I wish dealerships and manufacturers cared as much as they used to, but they don't.
Why new vehicles seem less reliable despite care. Massive electrical complexity. Modern vehicles rely on extensive computer systems. A single glitch in a sensor, screen, or module can cause a warning light, preventing the car from functioning properly. Small engine, high-stress design. To meet fuel efficiency standards, manufacturers use smaller engines with turbochargers that operate under extreme heat and pressure, leading to faster wear on parts. Electrical system strain. Cars are more electronically intensive than ever, but battery technology has not kept pace, causing higher rates of battery failure, sensor and infotainment failure. Cameras, sensors, cameras, radar for safety systems, and infotainment screens are frequent points of failure that cause breakdowns, though not always causing the car to stop moving. Tightened manufacturing tolerances. While modern manufacturing is precise, some manufacturers use thinner materials or lower-cost parts to manage the high expense of new technology integration. YouTube +5. Old-school vehicles comparison. Older vehicles were generally simpler, while they required more frequent basic maintenance, oil changes, spark plugs. They had fewer critical failure points. A broken sensor on an old car might make it run poorly. On a new car, it can cause the vehicle to enter limp mode or refuse to start. Quora +4 note. While new vehicles have more frequency of minor issues, electronics, major powertrain failures, engine transmission, within the first 3-5 years are still generally lower than on cars with high mileage. Consumer Reports +3.
New cars simply aren't built to last nearly as long as the older cars like this. Basic manual or torque converter automatic transmissions, far less electronic technology, a simple fuel source, engines that are naturally aspirated without turbos, and many of the 10 and 20-year-old vehicles were built from a time when manufacturers actually cared about getting customers to come back based on the quality and experience they had with their last vehicle. Manufacturers no longer care anymore. It's all about appeasing the shareholders, dazzling customers with exciting new technology and exciting new drivetrains. But all this additional technology and complexity in these modern day vehicles, as exciting as they are to drive, they simply are not built to last. Let's dive in and talk about some of the key reasons why these older cars will far outlast the new ones. Before we get in and revisit the good old days about how great cars used to be, they weren't always that way. I got this comment from MSS627 who says he's been driving for 40 years and there's been a lot of junk in the good old days. The old Mustang, the Pinto, Dodge Dakota, and a lot of those vehicles were junk. They were pieces of crap and they clearly weren't built to last. I personally have experienced a lot of those old vehicles with panel gaps that were ½ inch wide, vehicles that leaked, they smoked, they knocked, detonation. They just weren't built all that well. And a lot of those to speak of were domestic products. Now we also have to say, Honda has built some real junk cars back in the 70s. We have to think about Hondas and Toyotas. You could literally hear them rusting in your sleep. But things have changed, and the Japanese vehicle manufacturers started to realize that they had to build vehicles that would last a little longer. While their drivetrains or engines and transmissions were simple and reliable, their cars would typically rust away. They had to figure that out. They got past that. And now we finally hit a point, a peak. I truly believe we've actually hit the peak of quality, reliability, functionality, performance, and the like. And it's not today. As a matter of fact, I believe we've plateaued and we're going back downhill in terms of overall reliability because things have changed drastically. We see far more technology, we see far more performance, and that means the engines are running hotter, harder, stronger, but not longer. But let's take this from the top because we have to remember, back in the early 90s, when car manufacturers start to realize that cars were getting a little bit more complex and they needed to standardize the protocol so anybody could read the codes. Things have changed and had grossly advanced since that point. So looking at your typical car and your typical dashboard, right under here, you'll typically find an OBD code reader plug-in port, and that is derived from that necessity to be able to pull codes. So if there's trouble codes, car's not running right, and that was the beginning of where it all started. Yes, in fact, we're finding vehicles now to the point where they're reintroducing complex technology. You need special code readers, special scan.
Okay, stop right there. That's where today society is trash. Because I think cars were better in 1996. Because at least you could fix them at the side of the road. You could fix your own. You could do a lot with your car back then. An old school car was nicer than a new one. And even a new car back then did not have all the fancy technology. All the fancy technology might be needed to a point, but is it always sensible? I don't know if sensible is the right word, but do you need it? At least the old car, you could actually, I know they were heavier, I know they ran better. A new car today, a lot of brand new ones just break down.
And extra, a very expensive equipment that basically essentially means that you, me, the customer, the owner of these vehicles can no longer read your own codes, can no longer
yeah, you can read your own codes if you're maybe a mechanic or know cars really well. But that doesn't mean everybody can and everybody will
diagnose your own vehicle, simply because A, the manufacturers want to hoard some of the service activity and certainly want to
Well, that's true too.
bring dollars back into the manufacturer, but also for the simple fact these cars have gotten so complex over the last 10, 15 years that you need that very intensive diagnostic equipment.
Well, number one, that's true, but some people do have this stuff at their house or in their garage.
And just to sift through and figure out and diagnose what can possibly go wrong on these expensive, new, highly complex vehicles.
And I think Tesla, you have to send it right back to the dealer.
Now, we're not a fuddy-duddy, and we're certainly not trying to live in the past and say, oh, we all should be driving 1975 cars. On the contrary, most of those cars were junk back then. But things have gotten better. Where did that all turn, and how did it go so wrong? See, like everything, it doesn't matter whether you're talking about computers, electronics, and cars, things naturally advance. People learn, engineer.
Airplanes are the safest way to travel because every time something goes wrong with a plane, they're fixing it so it doesn't happen again and again and again and again.
Get smarter. Use of technology just makes our lives often more flexible, more comfortable, and certainly in a lot of ways, newer cars are a lot better than a lot of the older cars. They're safer, they have the crash testing, they're certainly a lot easier to use. But what we look under the modern day vehicle, this is an older vehicle. This one here is a 2013, already a basic
2013, 2011, I would say that's the year in a lot of cars that are good are really great cars in some ways. Like Honda, not so much Honda. I don't know much about Honda, so I'm not saying.
11 or 12-year-old vehicle, and we're seeing what the beginning of the end was for a manufacturer even like Honda, for example. Now, while Honda still makes fairly reliable vehicles,
I can't say they do or don't because I don't know anyone that has a Honda that lasted them.
things have changed, even for some of the
I know people with a Hyundai, but not people with a Honda.
manufacturers like this that used to make one of the arguably most reliable cars on the planet. See, looking under the hood here, we have a 1.8 liter 4-cylinder engine, naturally aspirated.
And 4-cylinder, you would not think would last as long because I don't think they go as far.
Port fuel injection, very simple. Basically, a little fuel, a little air goes in common plenum, and it gets injected in each spot. Now, it's not like the direct injection systems where they put the injectors right in the combustion chamber, which creates a lot of other problems. Detonation, low speed ignition that causes all kinds of other problems in the combustion chamber. Yes, this was from a time when things were simpler. You didn't have direct injection. You didn't have turbocharging in a lot of these older vehicles. Turbocharging is
I think you did have turbocharging, but it depended on the car. Really?
the source of a lot of extra wear and tear on vehicles. The demand for oiling is up. You don't need to do as much oil changes on an older, slower output, naturally aspirated engine. They simply don't put the burden on the oiling. They simply don't put the burden on the cooling system. They simply don't put the burden on any of the drivetrain. From the engine internally, down through the gearbox, down through the transaxle transmission or differential. They simply don't put the strain on the vehicle as a whole. And so the older naturally aspirated engines like this, very economical, very reliable, and because everything's very accessible here under the hood, they're very easy to maintain. And see, that's the other angle as to why a lot of these older vehicles simply last for a long time. Rarely do things break, and if they do, they're accessible, they're easy, the parts are cheap. Such is not the case with the new engines. I mean, now if you have to pull an injector out of a direct injection system, it's going to cost you hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. The fuel injector and the pumps are huge dollars in the new systems, whereas the old systems are quite affordable. Things are simple. O2 sensors, quite accessible. Oil changes, sure, every 8 to 10,000 kilometers. Belts, simple. And these old engines actually rocked a timing chain. See, that's the other perspective here. A lot of these new engines are using timing belts because in all their infinite wisdom, manufacturers feel that it's quieter. In some cases, they try to justify and say it's more reliable. In actuality, that's rarely the case. It's more conversely, a poorly designed timing chain setup can be unreliable, but that's few and far between, and that's usually more a response to, speccing out the wrong grade of plastic on the ramps or a poor host of components that keeps the chain tight. Some manufacturers are cheaping out and going with a single row timing chain, Mercedes for example, and that causes problems because that chain will tend to stretch. But when you get back to proper engineering, you don't have those issues. But timing belts are a wear item and you have to replace them. So manufacturers starting to use more technology like timing belts, direct in fuel injection, turbocharging, and a lot of this other technology under the hood just makes vehicles far more expensive, far more unreliable, but while they're built to run superbly well when they're running and when they're brand new, they're not built to last as long. These vehicles were slightly over-engineered. They're understrained, and when they do break, the parts are cheap, and a lot of times people can afford to fix them on their own driveway. See, that's the other part. As soon as you take away the power from the owner to be able to change your own oil, to be able to change your own alternator, or troubleshoot your own diagnostics with a simple little code reader, that car now becomes cost prohibitive to own. And as soon as it gets to that place, people are more inclined to either trade it off, send it to the auction, or scrap it by the simple result of a bad engine issue, maybe a module that went south that might cost you $8,000 when the vehicle may only be worth $7,000. It may in fact obsolete that car very, very quickly. Whereas these old vehicles have far less of that technology and people are more willing to just keep fixing, patching, put new parts in because the parts are cheap. And
That's better when you can actually patch it, fix it, make it last a little longer. But just because the parts are cheap doesn't mean it's always a good option. But it always means that you can if you have the chance, I would put a little more expensive of a part in because you may have the chance of it running a little longer, of it still breaking down on you.
owners can do the work themselves. Whereas the dealers now are designing the vehicles to be manhandled literally only by the dealer service department solely.
And that's totally not great either.
And it's hands off for you and I. Another factor to consider why the older cars are literally going to outlast the new cars by a long shot, electrics and electronics. Let's just get right into it. I mean, a lot of these older vehicles, this older Honda here has a very simple set of headlights. Pretty much nothing much more than an incandescent light bulb to swap out here, or you might have a halogen, but it's as simple as that. If you happen to crack this fixture, this might only cost you $200, and you could probably find a lot of these parts online, whether it's eBay or Amazon. Replacement parts are accessible and parts are relatively affordable. But when you look at a modern day Mercedes, for example, our C300, each light fixture has temperature sensors in it, LEDs, all kinds of other aggressive tech to replace a headlight. Where this one might be $200, the Mercedes, I've seen the bill, I've seen the invoice, $6,000 per corner. And that's where you actually lose a couple of headlights. Now you're into hawk for over $10,000 for a pair of headlights. And where a lot of manufacturers have been using basic technology and electrics for many years, it's nothing new and uncommon to have things like power mirrors, power sunroof. Things have in fact changed a lot of ways in a lot of modern day manufacturers because they've added a lot of extra complexity, a lot more computing power. Because now instead of having a basic little sunroof like this, they go and put a large panoramic glass which pops up, slides back, does all this weird maneuvering. And that glass is huge dollars. And the modules to drive that extra electronics means additional complexity and potential for failure, where these older vehicles are much simpler. Yes, even these moderately older vehicles still have central locking. You have lock, unlock. These vehicles here have one less feature to them. And the power folding mirrors just do not exist in this. This you have to do it the old school like this, see? Then you look inside these vehicles, these older vehicles here, you'll notice one key element. There's no large sunscreen in the middle. You don't have that big touch screen. You don't have all that extra electronics that go across. You don't have all this mood lighting that lights up. And while those technology pieces are very interesting and fun to watch and use, the fact remains is a very basic set of knobs and buttons like this barely ever fail. Even your heater controls, at the very most you have a little heater resistor in here, but everything's knobs and buttons and very cheap. Very little of the electronics going on, whereas the newer vehicles,
And cheap's not good either. But I don't totally disagree.
simply have far more technology wrapped up behind the hood. There's lights, there's all kinds of wide screens, big screens, touch screens, you name it. There's all kinds of technology going on behind the scenes. Now, I'm not one of these old fuddy-duddies that believes, oh, we should go back to all just crank windows and the absolute basic rubber floors. But in a lot of ways, I feel like we need to maybe pause, take a breath, and maybe look at the things that were working and maybe start eliminating some of those things that don't work that reliably. Now right here is another example of some of the older cars being far more reliable. We have a 5-speed automatic transmission in this generation of Civic, but you can also get a 5-speed manual gearbox, which makes it very reliable. But a lot of the modern day manufacturers decide in all their infinite wisdom, let's try some new things. In all the power of trying to transform and move into a newer high-tech world, they try things that maybe we never tried before. Continuously variable transmissions. Ask Nissan. They've had nothing but struggles and the company's on the verge of bankruptcy. A big part of it has to do with their CVT transmissions, but they can't build a proper transmission anymore. Now that unfortunately was an advancement that I truly believe was a regression in the quality as well as reliability of a lot of these modern day vehicles. The CVT transmission, in these cases with Nissan and Hondas, where Honda adopted that too, shortly after, a couple years after this car, all of a sudden realized that they were having some issues in their Civics and their Honda Accords, and that's where Honda's reputation starts to take a nosedive. Honda was always one of the top pops in Consumers Reports lists, always trading punches with Toyota and Lexus and Acura and Honda were always at the top, but they've been sliding, and some of it had to do with that automatic transmission or CVT transmission. See, this torque converter that's in this vehicle is the last of what they consider a relatively reliable setup. Now, unfortunately, they're also doing in other vehicles are adopting DCTs, dual clutch transmissions, very complex. We've got 2 rows of types of gears. We've got odds and evens, and they're alternating and they're constantly looking for the next gear. And of course, it's faster, it's more efficient, but they're heavier and they're more expensive. And so we're adding more complexity to these vehicles every single day. And so the addition to CVTs, DCTs, and a lot of these other vehicles now where they're adding in hybrid systems, they're just adding yet another layer of complexity that we never had before. And sure, while manufacturers like Toyotas and Lexus do know how to build a proper automatic transmission, they do know how to build a proper CVT with planetary gears, they do know how to build a proper hybrid system. The point is, they're not flawless, there are glitches, there are challenges, and unless you want to buy only a Toyota and you don't want to experiment with other brands, you're pretty much stuck buying the only manufacturer that, in my opinion, knows how to combine CVT as well as hybrid technology together. We're leading into a technological nightmare that truly is regressing the overall reliability of a lot of these vehicles. And while they might be fun and they're easy to use and they're great on fuel and in a lot of cases they perform well, we just got to realize a lot of these brands are not simply built to last anymore. Not like these basic vehicles, torque converter autos, naturally aspirated 4-cylinder or V6s in some of these vehicles. Make the power, transfer power to ground. And they looked at it in a very simplistic means. Things are getting far too complex with technology, electronics, modules, and of course, engines and transmissions are way more technologically
Yeah, they're so advanced, but are they better? No.
advanced than we've ever seen them. And while some of them are arguably quite reliable, the problem is when they fail, they cost so much that you pretty much might as well throw the vehicle away. Another area of concern right now is the extensive use of plastics in a lot of modern day vehicles. And even this vehicle here, you can start to see the beginning of that transformation. While this one isn't totally transformed yet in terms of the new use of plastics, I mean, a lot of these manufacturers, when you look underneath here, they'll actually use plastic on the oil pans under here. So when you look underneath and you go to do an oil change, you'll find that a lot of times the
Is that good? No, but it could be helpful, probably. Could be helpful if it was metal, but metal's also weight.
pan that's actually the base to the engine that holds the oil, the sump, if you will, are actually made of plastic. You know, back in the day, you could buy those nice magnetic engine warmers that you just magnetically stick them to the bottom of the engine, plug them in for these cold temperatures. A lot of those, you can't do that anymore. They're plastic bottoms. They crack, they can split, and they're certainly more prone to leaking as well. There's just more examples of cheap products being used in the vehicles where they probably shouldn't have. Even the extra use of plastic up on the top here, well,
That's for sure. You don't need an engine cover that's plastic. If you're gonna do one, it's good to do one that's metal or maybe aluminum, but or a light metal, and I think aluminum's that. Another thing is, I also wouldn't be putting a lot of junk on your car like this because it is making it to the point that it's so hard that some of this plastic, if it got too hot, it could overheat and melt.
this here is a cover itself. This here down here is not so much. So even Honda is starting the use of some plastics. Now,
That's not good. Plastics are not good on your engine.
some plastic doesn't matter. Does this matter? No. That's a housing for the air filter. Housing for the fuses. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. There's a lot of use of plastics that simply don't matter in any car. But as soon as you start incorporating plastics onto the engine, that's where you're starting to run into some troubles. Ask a lot of the manufacturers how that's working out from Audi and BMW and the VAG group, where they're using plastic intake manifolds, plastic oil pan covers, plastic water pumps that are electric, plastic impellers on the water pumps that fail and send the debris shrapnel through the engine. There's a lot of use of plastic now where they never did, 20 years ago. Now, again, this isn't a conversation about the oldest junky car that you can possibly get your hands on. The point is, there's areas where they're starting to cut corners, and now we're starting to see this regression in terms of overall quality and reliability.
That is a good point because actually they are using a lot more plastic than what they used to.
That's the key. And in my personal opinion, where we look at a 10-year-old car like this, of one of the most reputable, most reliable manufacturers, we're starting to see the transition here. We're starting to see small amounts of sprinkling in this extra use of plastic, small amounts of technology. We're seeing on the dash, they have that electric tech on the front dash. You'll notice Honda has incorporated that cute little dash display, that secondary pod. You're starting to see sprinklings of this new technology, but not so much that it's causing any serious problems. Remember, this one has a timing chain, which is good. This one has a torque converter automatic transmission, which is good. This has a naturally aspirated engine,
So we're getting to the good parts of the car.
which is good, all of which are good if you're looking for reliability and low cost of running and servicing. Well, this is not built to run a lot of races. It certainly will get you 300,000 or 400,000 kilometers trouble-free for years to come. And a lot of it is pushing the limits. How much engineers are always thinking about what if, how can we do this better? How can we do this less? How can we push the thermal limits? How can we run the limits of how long this vehicle will last. I mean, let's face it, every component with any modern day vehicle now has so many limits on it. Of course, this power window, this regulator is not built to last forever. There will be a finite number of controls and operations. This will not last forever. Open this up. Of course, these buttons will not last forever. They will have a limited lifespan. And it doesn't matter how well they're made, there will be a limited lifespan. And some vehicle manufacturers may have lifespans. This may work for 500,000 operations, where a BMW might be built for 100,000 operations, but it feels nicer to the touch. So that's a big thing. It's all about how it's engineered. And so you have this constant push-pull from two different groups. The engineering department that knows how far they can go and how many operations or how long this vehicle is designed to run for. But then you have the bean counters always trying to satisfy the bottom line with the CEO and all the top executive leaders that say, look,
why don't they have a car that has roll down windows with the old crank in a couple different ways? One was the crank, one was the button, so that if there's emergency, you can still crank down your window, or use that all the time. The button or crank down your window.
Maximize our profits, minimize our costs. How can we do that in the best way possible? Now you have the bean counters, the accountants, we also working hand in hand with the engineers saying, how much can we save here? How little can we do, and how long can we make this last just outside of warranty so we don't have all these callbacks? We don't want to infringe on our reputation, and we know as well, and the marketing department's working on the front end to constantly put people in the next vehicle. This throwaway marketing is a constant evolution as well, because they know that people, they're going to put you into a vehicle, and most people are flipping their vehicles in 3 to 4 years, and so warranty doesn't matter. And so quality of vehicles does not matter today like it did.
Warranty used to matter more than it does today for cars. What? I think that's bullcrap. Because warranty matters just as much as it used to, because things break.
20 years ago, 20, 25, 30 years ago, you buy a truck, the thing's still on the road today. You buy a new truck today, it won't last 10 years. So that's the key. That's the bottom line, is they know that people have a short attention span. People are seriously from a throwaway society, and they're willing to accept the fact that they're going to trade it in, trade it off, dump it, or do something different in 5 years anyway, so they don't build it to last as long as they possibly could. The engineers are kicking in, the marketers, the accountants, and the CEO is all bearing down, and the CEO and all of the senior leaders are accountable to shareholders when you're dealing with a publicly traded company. And without getting into the politics side of it, there's a lot going on behind the scenes why these vehicles are clearly built better 20 years ago than they are today. Now, if you go back into the 70s, you can make all kinds of arguments. They rusted, they leaked, they smoked, they just weren't built to the same capacity. But I truly believe that we've hit a point. We've hit that tipping point. And that tipping point was somewhere between 10 and 20 years ago, depending on the manufacturer, where we started introducing too much technology, started bringing in troublesome drivetrains, troublesome engines, troublesome transmissions. That means customers just want to toss the vehicle when it starts getting costly. This is literally the way the automotive industry is going. And that's why, sure, it's great to buy a brand new car. But even this, when we consider that Honda now has recalls for that 1.5 liter turbo, oil and fuel dilution issues. They're now 3.5 liter engine. We're seeing millions of recalls now because that 3.5 liter V6, that's catastrophically failing because of machining tolerances at the bottom end and the crankshaft of that engine. We're seeing Toyota, of course, particulate in the engine on this new 3.4s. We're also seeing problems with the Tacomas and the transmissions, that new 8-speed auto. The manual gearboxes are problematic. We're seeing rear hub issues and a whole host of troubles in vehicles that we never dreamed of 10 years ago. Toyota and Honda had built such a reputation blowing out of the 80s, started creating vehicles that were far more reliable than anything else on the market. But it's this advancement to turbocharging, direct injection, hybrid technology, pushing more, doing more with less, and having, in my own personal opinion, you're seeing some of the corners being cut on a lot of these vehicles now. Brand new Toyotas are not built like Toyotas were 10 years ago, 15 years ago. You're seeing it, sharper edges, unfinished products, cheaper plastics. It feels like Toyota has even taken some corner cutting as well.
I think companies are trying to take the easy route or doing hard work. Instead, they're doing hard work, but they're not doing everything they should be. Like, a lot of these companies are not just doing whatever needs to be done in the company, they're also doing what needs to just make them the next buck, not just whatever makes them a lot of money. They're working on what makes them a lot of money, not what works just to make them money. They used to care about the quality, and they don't care about the quality either anymore. And that's not good either, I don't think. So that's my opinions on this video.